What I'm going to do now, and as you can see, the topic is a bit changed, is to show you something that I was quite surprised that I even came across during my PhD period, and I'm trying to write an article about it, so I will be more than happy to hear your comments, and I will maybe we can refer to it as if it's some kind of case report, as our friends in basic science used to call it, and I'm not so sure that we can build, you know, a whole theory on it, but it should be noted. So I'll start. So Leah Chamilewski arrived at Kalisz as a young teacher in 1927 during the vivid years of interwar Poland. After a year of training at the CYSZO, the Yiddish Socialist School Network Teachers Seminar, and most probably after years as a political activist of the socialist political party Coalition Left, she found herself in the frontier of the left-wing Jewish education of this central city. Not much is known about Chamilewski, and we can just assume what was her life story and how she managed to make Aliyah to Israel at the end. In the summer of 1967, during the euphoria time after the Israeli decisive victory of the 6 Days War, the Kalish Landsmannschaften, that we talked about it yesterday, it was the local organization of survivors and community members from cities around Poland, and not only Poland. So the Kalish Landsmannschaften published 2 volumes memory book, Yizkor Book, as Gil mentioned yesterday, in memory of the community in Kalisz. The second volume includes a 2.5 pages chapter written by Leah Chamilewski, dealing with the CYSZO school in the city. From this very much detailed source, we can learn about the life and work in the new political community that gathered around this special school. Chamilewski describes the ideology and the principle that she led at the school, the curriculum, and even the physical condition of the school building and the economic problems of the school management. And believe me, lots of economic problems. In a purely coincidental situation, I came across Leah Chamilewski archive file in the Central Archive for Jewish Education in Israel and the Diaspora, located in Tel Aviv University. If someone is interested, very nice archive, very nice archivist, so go there. In this file, I was delighted to find a 7 pages draft for the same chapter that was published in the Kalisz memory book. This draft was different from the edited published chapter of the memory book, and include more personal details as well as expression of Chamilewski's grief for her loss. A comparison between these 2 sources reveals the gap between the narrative that reflected in the edited book to the narrative that the writer tried to draw in the first place. It's important to indicate that as we have only one example of a draft and his edited version, we can only relate it to this example as a case report. So a bit about those Yizkor Books, Yiddish for the one of you that can read, but I'll obviously translated it. The tradition of memory books dedicated to communities, events, or people is well rooted in the Jewish history since the Middle Ages. But it is true that memory books in honor of Jewish communities who vanished during the Holocaust, what we call Yizkor Book or Yizkor Book, Yizkor Bicher in Yiddish, are much more familiar to the public. This corpus refers to books that was written during and after World War II, and includes historical background about the city and the Jewish community that used to live in it, some memoirs of Jewish community members. Sometimes we can even find photos and archives related documents, and at the end, the story of the Holocaust and the tragic end of the community. The earliest Yizkor book that was published is the Lodger Yizkor book. This book was published in New York during 1943, while the war was still ongoing. The book was opened with the short but very powerful sentence, and I'm quoting, "This book is dedicated to our sisters and brothers in our hometown Łódź, which murdered on Kiddush Hashem by Hitler's forces and their helpers."
Hitler's beasts.
Yeah. Except of the Lodger Yizkor book, we should note that before 1953, only few Yizkor Bücher were published, and that the vast majority of the publication occurred during the 60s and the 70s. Some scholars tried to explain the reason to this and refer it to the time it took to the Holocaust survivors to re-establish their life before they could process their trauma. A bit about Kalisz Yizkor book. The Jewish community of the city of Kalisz, unlike most of the Jewish communities, managed to publish more than one book to commemorate the life that ended in their hometown. The first Kalisz Yizkor book, Toldot Yehudei Kalisz, was published in 1961 by Israel David Beit Halevi. 3 years later, the Kalisz Landsmannschaften published the first volume of the Kalisz book, and after another 3 years, the second volume was published. Kalisz book was written in Hebrew and Yiddish, but was translated into English as well. The book contained an academic part, written by Natan Michael Gelber, which was a professional historian, that, one of his tasks after World War II was to help those Landsmannschaften to rewrite the history of their hometown communities, and took part in hundreds of Yizkor Bücher publications. We can see in here Hebrew, sorry for the one who cannot read. So this is the first page of the second volume of the Kalisz Yizkor book, and it's written that this book was published during the, it was printed during the days of the victory of the 6 Days War, and obviously it's not because the euphoria of the winning the victory during the war what made them to publish the book, because it's years before they started to work on it, but it's interesting to see the narrative that they tried to show in their book. Okay, and now we'll go back to our lady, Leah Chamilewski, and to the file that I found in the archive. So, as I said before, not much is known about the life story of Leah Chamilewski. What we do know from that file that was kept in the dark corridors of Tel Aviv University basement is that Chamilewski finished her training as a teacher during the mid-20s in the CYSZO teacher seminar in Warsaw and not in Vilnius. Her first position as a teacher was in a small town named Breza Kartoshka, Bertus Breza in Yiddish, and in 1927 she moved to Kalisz. She was appointed as a teacher and the principal of the CYSZO Borchov School, which was the Poalei Zion left branch of this school, as this school was some kind of networking between 3 political parties, left, Poalei Zion left, the Bund, which also I think Gil mentioned yesterday, the Socialist Party, and the Volksparty, which was so-called secular Yiddishist party that was central mainly in Warsaw. So this branch of the school, CYSZO Bochów School, was connected to Polizjon left. In the early 30s, she moved again to Warsaw this time and worked for 2 years in one of the CYSZO schools in Prague neighborhood. During 1932, she managed to make Aliyah and settled in Tel Aviv. We can see here, this is Leah in the middle, with her pupils from her classroom in Warsaw. It's her first, it's written that this is the first photo that they took before she left to Israel. In 1967, the year that Kalisz book was published, she was, according to an article in Ma'ariv, a daily newspaper, already retired and spent her days painting and drawing with friends on the Yarkon river bank. And this we know because we have this amazing project J-Press that you can just find, have like a search for names and places and just find her name. Okay. So a comparison between the draft that was written by Chmielewski and the edited chapter revealed very specific differences of several kinds. The first, and expected, is shortening of several description and linguistic editing, which can be understood from a pragmatic reasons. The second type, which is interesting, but I will not elaborate on this due to the time limit, is transforming of personal sentences to declaration to more general, and declarations, to more general ones. If this was the only case, we will not be talking here today, as it can be attributed to writing style differences between the editor and the writer. The third, unquestionable difference is erasing of complete paragraphs, all related to personal statements, opinions, and even to emotions and feelings expressed by Chmielewski. The chapter still includes some grief, longing, and sorrow, but in more lower volume or more lower scale. Again, the only paragraphs that were completely erased are those related to feelings and emotions and personal opinion. I will present some examples of those erased parts. So, our first example is the opening paragraph of Chmielewski. She writes, and I want to say sorry because I think that something, you know, in the translation, yeah, something is just lost in translation. So if you want to see the Hebrew version, you can come to me. So out of awe and reverence, existence and great respect, I would like to tell the miracle story about the birth and fear of the existence of the Yiddishist school in a sea of assimilation, hatred and diaspora. I will do it with great satisfaction, as by that I will shed a light on the sacrifice of the proletariat youth. This whole paragraph just erased from the edited chapter, and I think that in Hebrew she writes Bechil v'ra'ada. This is how she opened her memoir or her chapter. And yeah, and yeah. So and the edited chapter just started with those details about the school, how many pupils were there, and all those very important things, but not what she wanted to express from the first place. Our second example is, I was a young teacher back then. I had only 3 years of teaching experience that started just after I finished my training at the CYSZO Teacher Seminar in Warsaw. I worked in a small town, Kartus Breza, under Yona Roznik. Roznik, who was very strict principal. He was very conservative and did not let the junior staff to introduce any innovations. And suddenly, I was in this big city of Kalisz, with its beautiful street, fancy buildings, and designed shop windows, lavish plaza, well-kept riverbanks, huge bridges and waterfall, which made a big impression on me. I could not compare this glory to the poor and miserable town I used to work in as a teacher until then. So first of all, I think that all of those name dropping in here, it's kind of it can, you know, offend this poor previous boss of her. So you can understand why the editor decided to erase this part. But again, the way she described Kalisz and the way that Kalisz impressed her as a young woman arrived to the city, it's kind of weird, I should say. And another example that I found is that, where you are now, our dearest Moishelach and Shloimelach, and all the precious life, on your lost our souls are crying. And Chmielewski continues by mentioning some other names of remarkable pupils, all of those parts erased from the edited text. Okay, so I will conclude and by saying that those differences or disappearance of the personal and emotional aspects from the edited published chapter raise the question whether it was related to gender. The relationship between gender and emotion have been previously discussed. For example, Stephanie Shields noted in her book, Speaking from the Heart, the belief that women are more emotional than men are one of the strongest gender stereotypes held in Western culture. Were these feelings and emotions that Chmielewski expressed in her draft attributed by the editor to the so-called feminine sentiment rather than to proper history? I will also mention Victoria Breskoll, that argues in her paper, Leading with Their Hearts, that female, but not male, have to navigate or to control their emotions. She suggests that women first need to identify how much emotion they are allowed to display, and second, to identify what kind of emotions should they display. At the end, she concludes by saying that that emotion should be expressed by women, but in a low scale, in order to be related as communal and warm, and to fulfill their role as women. I will suggest new perspective on the private and the public elements of the Yizkor Books. I argue that even though those books give the impression that they are a collective Egodocument, as they were written mainly by ordinary people and aim to present their personal memoirs of the life that ended, this corpus is much more edited and uniform than we used to think. Thank you.